Super cool.
Is this gonna make you feel better?
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Because you have to have like the newest Zoom client. I tried to do it in my other class where I have like 25 students. And there it's different. So then it's like a discussion class, so everybody's showing up. But then the people that didn't have a new Zoom client, they said that my background just appears black. They didn't like it, so I turned it off. But yeah, this is cool. Try it. It's like we're back at CBS. Although the weird thing is that I'm like, if I look at the picture, I'm facing myself. It's kind of, so it's like it's the wrong direction. But yeah. All right, it is 12:35 though, and so I believe this is a record. I thought that I saw that Kai actually had joined. Maybe that was you, Kai. But we only have 2 people here. So I mean, I'm not even sure if it makes sense to do a Kahoot with just 2 people. So maybe rather than that, we'll just talk about the questions. Also, I excuse me, I forgot to upload the. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. You would guarantee a spot on the podium. That's true. But anyway, so I actually forgot to upload the session last week, so I will upload that. One of the students emailed me yesterday and said, I said, I saw that you didn't upload your session. That's true, I didn't. So today we're talking about the first 3, I guess, of the 6 international economics puzzles. I have a Kahoot to do about it. We don't have any more exercises to do in the exercise in the last exercise. I did solve, didn't I? Remind me, Kai, do you remember, did I solve the last problem in the problem set from last time? I know that I wrote out the solution, but I can't remember if I discussed it. I think I did though. It was the one about like.
You ended with 616. Was that the last question?
That was the last question, yeah. Okay, so then I don't have any other problems to discuss. I did post, or at least I sent to the administrator who posts the last mandatory assignment, which is more or less just the final exam from last year. So then once that's turned in, then we can solve that as well. I think there's not much more to say about that. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but we technically don't have to do the assignment to have the rights to take the final exam, right?
If you've passed the first 3, then you don't have to, right? So the idea is that you need to pass 3 out of 4. So if you have passed the first 3, then you don't have to do the last one. Although this is the one probably of all of the assignments that you probably want to do the most, because it is literally a version of a final exam. And I'll tell you that I've been teaching this course and actually other courses at CBS. I basically write my exams the same way for every course. There's like short answers on top. So that's like very short things. It might be something like, what are 3 things that make a country grow? Or, and then it might be something like better technology, more people, and more capital, or I don't know, something like that, something like that. So, something very short. So I usually have like a short question section. Then I have like a couple of more involved questions where you'll often have to do some sort of calculation, more like the homeworks. Often they're very closely related to the homeworks. And then finally, I'll have like a very short, like a couple of paragraphs, like calling it an essay is even the wrong thing, but it's like a slightly longer short answer where I usually want you to kind of apply something. So I might say, use discussion and models from class to talk about a pension reform, from the real world, and what effects do you think this will have, type of thing. So that's usually that's always the format, and it's not going to change this year. And so you'll see the questions that I asked last year. So yeah, that's that. All right, let's see here. We have 5 people. 5 people is enough. that's enough to do a Kahoot. So we will do the Kahoot. No more guarantees on the podium, unfortunately. So let me quick pull that up. I actually didn't have a Kahoot on this one. The other Kahoots I already had from previous years, but this one I made this morning. It's okay. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, close Facebook. And let's see here. Got one more. All right, oof. 6 puzzles of international macro. Which of these is not one of the 6 puzzles? Purchasing power parity disconnect, Feldstein-Horoika puzzle, home bias disconnect, or low consumption growth correlation. So I was a bit tricky here, right? Because obviously home bias is one of the puzzles, but home bias disconnect is not one of the puzzles. All the other ones are actually just on that first slide. So not much more to say about that. Home bias, obviously, home bias both in trade and in investments. Those are both puzzles, but it's not the disconnect. So that's a bit of parsing the words carefully there. The other ones actually are all puzzles, right? Low consumption growth correlation. That's the idea that you'd expect that it doesn't matter how fast your own country is growing, because you're going to invest in the countries in the world that are growing the fastest, regardless of where they are. So you shouldn't have a correlation between your own consumption and your own growth. Feldstein-Horoika, we're going to talk about that one, but that's the one that basically says it's basically a version of the home bias and investments puzzle. So you wouldn't expect, literally what it says is that national national savings and national investment should not be correlated. And the reason why is because my investments should be anywhere, right? So the amount that my country saves shouldn't be related to the amount that is invested in my country, since the investment should go all over the world, not just to my country. So there shouldn't be this relationship between national savings and national investment. It turns out that there actually is a big relationship. And then purchasing power parity disconnect just says that the exchange rate and purchasing power parity aren't correlated the way they should be. We're going to talk about that one next week, so I won't say anything more about it. Okay, so yeah, that was a bit tricky. Well done, Oof. What is the common factor which Obstfeld and Rogoff used to solve all 6 of the puzzles? Monetary policy volatility, trade costs, correlated macroeconomic shocks, or sticky prices? Yeah, it's trade costs. So they're going to try to, so especially with like home bias and trade, it's kind of very direct, right? If it's very costly to ship goods, then you're going to buy more from your own country rather than from abroad because it's very expensive. But they're going to use this trade costs again and again and again to try to solve all of these puzzles. There is empirical evidence for large trade costs, true or false? So does it seem like trade costs are large or small in the data? It seems like they're large in the data, I should say. Yeah, there are some. Yeah, maybe this was a bit tricky the way I asked this. Some my phrasing isn't perfect first round here, but I was thinking here about the idea that there's so much more trade between provinces in Canada than there is trade between provinces in Canada and states in the United States, even if they're the same distance and similar size, right? So you can take that as evidence for large trade costs. Now, of course, if you think about like transportation costs, like the cost of putting goods onto a ship, freight costs, if you like, those typically aren't big. I mean, it's something, but it's not nothing, but they're not big. So, one puzzle is what causes these large trade costs. So I still think the answer here is true. There is evidence for large trade costs. Maybe they're not costs in terms of freight. Maybe it's things like, networks. It's harder to find the buyer in a foreign country. I have a paper about that, about search for buyers in foreign countries as sort of a trade cost. Yeah, so that's the answer to that one. All right, so the Feldstein-Heroica explanation requires a big country or a small country. So if we're trying to solve the Feldstein-Heroica puzzle, do we need that the country we're talking about is small, or do we need that it's big? At least for the explanation that they give. Yeah, it's got to be a small open economy, right? So the idea is that you're going to take the interest rate abroad as given. And that's actually a really fundamental part of the solution here. So it's sort of funny, with economists, like if you think about like publishing papers, often when you publish, people really like to have the United States as kind of the central example. And the reason why is because a lot of the sort of most important journals and sort of the universities that are the most prestigious are in the United States. So like the editors of the most prestigious journals are in the United States. So often you take the United States as an example. You can see it in economics textbooks, right? I mean, how many of your textbooks that you've had as European students have basically been talking about dollars and American foreign policy or American policies and whatnot? It's just, there's just a lot written about the United States. The United States is not a small country, right? So what America, what the United States does in terms of trade policy very likely affects the interest rates that other people are paying. So, this model probably applies better to Denmark than it does to the United States. But anyway, here's like other one, right?
You don't think it's just like a home bias for you?
Home bias for me?
You notice the dollar everywhere?
It could be. I was just reading somewhere that you've never really become, like a citizen or like a resident of a foreign country until you start thinking about things in terms of the foreign currency. So like, if I see a house and I'm trying to think, is this apartment, is it a good value, for the size? I still to this day convert it into dollars in my head before I think about whether that's reasonable or not. So yeah, I've still got a ways to go. That could be. Should you invest in your own employer's stock? Yes, probably, or no, probably not. Of course, there's a bit of, wiggle room here, but generally. You can't invest in CBS stock since it's not, it's a government institution. But if you had invested in CBS stock, you'd be doing very well right now, because I don't know if you guys saw, but the CBS budget, they had a lot more money this year than they expected, like to the order of, like several. See, I'm gonna get the currency wrong, but it was like several $1 million. So what would that be in kroner? See, I'm just giving you an example here. But it was like, say 25 million kroner, something like that. So must be more than that. Maybe it was 250 million. I don't know, whatever. It was a lot. The budget overshoot was really a lot. So anyway, everybody said no, probably not. And of course, the thinking here, as you guys all realized, is that your labor income comes from this company. And then if you also have your savings in the company, then if the company gets a bad shock, then maybe you get fired. So both your labor income goes down, and also the value of your investments goes down, right? So that's kind of like a correlated shock. So I can imagine situations where you might think, suppose you're working for like a small business, and how well the business does depends on how much effort you provide to the business. You could imagine where there would be some arrangement that it could be better to have sort of equity shares in the company or something. But generally, this is probably a bad idea. Side note, some companies do pay with stocks. So what you'd expect sort of people who receive stocks as payments to do, if they were, quote, rational, right, or trying to maximize their return on their investments, what you'd expect them to do would be, as soon as that they can sell the stocks, often there's sort of a cool down period, or the stocks become vested after a number of years, you'd expect them to sell the stock as soon as they can. But I suspect that people don't do that. So for a while, I was actually considering looking at Danish data to try to figure out whether or not people actually do sell their stock immediately as soon as they can, or whether they hold on to it even though they're working in the same company where their stocks are issued. But it turns out that it's not quite so easy to see that in our administrative data. We can see whether people hold stocks, and we can see whether they hold stocks that were given to them as compensation. But there's a little bit of wiggle room there, and the project never really got off the ground. So yeah, at one point I was thinking about that. All right, last question. According to Rogoff and Opsfeld, why invest so much in home? Know more about local conditions. Patriotic as well as economic factors play a role. You can affect the local economy through effort, or low interest when lending and high interest when borrowing. Exactly. So, the way this mechanism works is that the interest rate is sort of given abroad. So because of the way that trade works, when you're borrowing, that means that you're exporting. That means that you're facing relatively, let's see here, you're borrowing, you're facing relatively low interest rates today. No, that can't be right. You're facing a relatively high real interest rate. Yeah, that's right. If you're borrowing, you're facing a relatively high real interest rate. If you're lending, you're facing a relatively low real interest rate. So it becomes unattractive to actually to borrow internationally, I should say. So you'd rather just invest in local assets rather than abroad. Oof. So my son plays Minecraft, and the villagers, or maybe it's the Minecraft character, one of them says oof, and when I hear it, I immediately think of oof, oof. But I hear it from the other room when he's playing that. Okay. So how do I get these guys to come into the room? Oh, I have to assign them. Interesting. Yeah. Elmar, you can sit in front. There you go. Okay. So that's the Kahoot. What's left is basically to talk about any questions you guys might have had about the the discussion about the slides. So I'll pull those up. As fun as it is to have you guys sitting in a classroom, unfortunately, I think I have to share my screen again once I pull these slides up. Masters macro, global 2021. All right, 6 puzzles, 1. Yep. Share my screen again. So, questions? Cheap home bias and trade, home bias and portfolio, not a disconnect.
All right, I'll ask.
Shoot.
In the second one, Fallstein-Horioka puzzle, one of the what comes out of it is that you want to have a low trade deficit so that you don't force the interest rates of the home company up or home country up. I did not really get how that came.
Yeah, so like a super important part about the puzzle is that you need to reverse trade flows, right? So first there's like a home product and a foreign product, but they're not only produced in home and foreign. Let's look at it again. Let me make sure I don't screw this up. I did watch this video yesterday. Let's see here. Okay, it's an endowment economy, so there's no production actually. Yeah, I still think that's right though. So I think an important point here is that whether I'm importing or exporting this good, both are possible. So I have to change my whether I'm an importer or exporter. So let me just scroll down here. I know that's important here. I think I talk about it somewhere. I don't know what's up here maybe. Yeah, so check this out. So this is important. So home imports the home endowment good in period 1. So even though we're calling it, this is a bit confusing. Even though we're calling it sort of the home good, it's the home endowment good. It's also produced abroad potentially. Okay, so it's not, the way you want to think about this is that there's this little country, they're not the only ones to produce either of the goods, but they're endowed with only one of the goods. Okay, so you can see here in this borrowing case, in the first period, home is importing the home endowment good. In the second period, home is exporting the home endowment good. Okay. And why is that borrowing? It's because they're gonna consume more. They're gonna consume more than their endowment of the home good in the first period, and they're gonna consume less of their home endowment good in the second period. So that means that they're importing in one period, meaning they're consuming more than their endowment, and then the second period they're exporting more than they're consuming. Okay, so in a sense, that's like borrowing. You're going to import more today, and then tomorrow you're going to pay back by exporting. In that sort of this sort of importing today, and then more than, so forget the model. Importing more than you produce is like a way of borrowing. You eventually have to pay that back. So like the United States now relative to say China, I'm now proving the example that when I come up with examples, I think of the United States, but it's also because it's a big position. So it's easy to think about. But the United States is like, borrowing because they're consuming more than they're producing. And then eventually sometime in the future, they're going to have to pay that back. Okay, so it's a form of running a current account deficit is a form of borrowing. You can think of it as a form of borrowing. Okay, so that's what's happening here. Now, Kari, I'm not sure if your question was about the mechanics of this situation, or
yeah, and it's more about how the interest rate then play a role into it. But I guess it's because you have to pay your borrowed in the future.
Yeah, exactly. So this interest rate here is just kind of taken as given, and then this one here you want to think of as the inflation. Okay, so you're taking the interest rate and dividing by inflation, which is P2 divided by P1. That's just the price index. And that thing is affected by whether you're an exporter or an importer. And that's kind of the whole key. So when you are an importer, then in order to make the firms abroad that are sending you the product indifferent between selling it in their own country and selling it in your country, well, then that means the price in your country has to be higher. And the reason why that is because if the firms put 1 unit of the good on a ship, part of it falls off before the ship gets to your country. So they can't sell as many units as they would be able to sell in their own country, if that makes sense. So that means that they have to charge, in order to be indifferent, they have to charge a higher price when they're selling in home rather than when they're selling in foreign. So, I mean, that's kind of it, right? So whenever I'm importing, I'm paying a higher price. Whenever I'm exporting, I'm paying a lower price. And it has to do with this idea that the firms have to be indifferent. And then, if my price changes between the two periods, then that's going to affect my real interest rate, because the price in one period will be different than and this price here is like our price index. It's a combination of both the price of the home good and the price of the foreign good, but the price of the foreign good is, we're always importing that. So it's not affected by whether we're importing or exporting the home endowment good.
Can you go one slide up, 22, at the bottom? It says this mechanism will prevent lending or saving from growing too large.
Yeah, exactly, through the mechanism we just talked about, right? So when you are lending, you're facing a low real interest rate. When you're borrowing, you're facing a high real interest rate. So it's like what often happens in economics models is that the equilibrium forces moderate outcomes. So here's an example of that. The equilibrium force is pushing in the opposite. Suppose we just took the interest rate as fixed, then potentially you could imagine a situation where people are making a crazy amount. I don't know. Forget this model in particular, but suppose that we're thinking about saving, okay, and suppose that the savings rate or the interest rate is 15% and it's safe, okay, so much higher than it is in the real world. You could imagine where people would want to save a massive amount of money, but because the interest rate reacts to the amount of savings there is, then you expect that as people start wanting to save a massive amount of money, then the return is going to go down. So that serves to moderate the amount of saving, and that force is basically happening here as well. The equilibrium is a bit different, but the idea is that the interest rate is reacting to people's behavior, and it's going to go kind of in the opposite direction to moderate it. That's what I mean there. Yeah, this one is, I think that this puzzle is very subtle. It's actually like you can see that it's a bit hard to, it's a bit hard to sort of explain intuitively. Like if I had to explain this to my mom, I think it would be really hard. But the important thing is you need to have this reversal. You need to have it so you're importing a good in one period and exporting the same good in the other period. So if I scroll down here, that's this picture. So I'm not sure how much I said I'm not sure if I totally explained this picture in the video, but Y1 here is like your endowment of the home good. So if you consume more, than your endowments, then that means that you are borrowing. If you consume less than your endowment, then it means that you're lending. So here you can see, especially let's get over here to like this area, area 1 or area 2. This is the area where I have these big lending positions. I'm consuming much less than I'm actually, than my endowment. So I'm really exporting more than my endowment, right? So this is my big lending position. And here, look, I've got a low interest rate, a low real interest rate. Here's my big borrowing position. This is where I'm consuming much more than my endowment. And here I'm facing a very high interest rate. Okay. So again, when I'm borrowing, I'm facing a high interest rate. When I'm lending, I'm facing a low interest rate. That's not very attractive. Why am I showing you this slide? Notice that for this region here, with small positions where I'm either lending a little bit or I'm borrowing a little bit, the interest rate is constant. And the reason why that is because there's no trade reversals here. I'm not changing from being an exporter to an importer. Just my position is so small that if I'm borrowing, all it means is that I'm exporting more one period and, exporting less in one period and then exporting more in the other period, but I'm always an exporter. So the price isn't changing, if that makes sense. So then I don't get this change in the, there's no inflation. The real rate is the same as the nominal rate. So I think I would maybe try to use that intuition. It'd still be tough to explain to my mom, I think. I hope she's not watching this. I don't think I'm quite sure she's not on my YouTube channel watching my lectures. But yeah, it's a bit subtle, right? So you need to have this idea of no arbitrage so that firms are different between selling in their own country or selling in the other country. And since there's transport costs, it means the firms have to charge a higher price in the other country. So yeah, I mean, I think these are sort of interesting. I'm wondering if maybe next, I was thinking, this is just now, I'm just talking to you guys, but the reason I kind of put these in is because both, this is like a very famous paper about these 6 puzzles. And, I think it is kind of clever that they explain all of them through just using trade costs. You'll see that the way they do 5 and 6 is kind of hand wavy, but it's still, I think it's still an interesting idea. I'm thinking maybe next year, possibly doing more sort of straight trade. Did you guys have you guys had a class in international trade? Like, I guess maybe you've had an international economics course, but have you ever had like I mean, what's your exposure to trade economics? Have you guys done like, say, the Ricardian model and, kind of basic international trade?
Waiting for the other two to say something.
How about you, Kari? Have you?
Yeah, we in my bachelor's we did a lot of macroeconomics, and we studied a lot of Samuelson and his trade, which is a lot about like home and foreign and everything.
Okay, I'm not 100% sure what exactly you mean. So, I know there's this Dornbusch Fisher Samuelson
Yeah,
model.
so that's the one. That's the Samuelson one. And I know that this paper even references Samuelson
Yeah. Well, sure, of
in the
course.
beginning.
Yeah. So, I mean, this Dornbusch Fisher Samuelson, that became an extremely influential way of modeling international trade, famously sort of extended by Paul Krugman in the early 80s. So yeah. But I mean, I don't think I would do. Maybe I could do the Krugman papers. He has some interesting puzzles that he solves as well. For instance, he talks about why you would ship the same good in two directions. Like, why do you send cars from Germany to Italy and also from Italy to Germany? Shouldn't it be that just one country is more efficient at making cars and the trade only goes in one direction?
No.
Well,
Why would you think that? That's like
that's
micro
about trade.
101 about like different types of production cost
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
and like relative advantages of one country.
but I mean, yeah, Micro 101 is the one that says that they should only go in one direction.
No.
For example, let me give you an example. So for example, China sends cheap manufactured goods to the United States. The United States does not send cheap manufactured goods to China. They send, other sort of services and more complicated to produce goods to China. So there it looks like the trade is going in one direction. It's like cheap manufactured goods, toys, say. The United States, I'm not 100% sure that's true, but almost certainly the United States sends almost no clothing, no toys, no furniture. That one might be tough, but almost no toys or clothes certainly to China. And China sends lots of that to the United States. Same for Denmark. Denmark sends pork to Russia. I don't think that Russia sends pork to Denmark. So, I mean, that's kind of the typical situation, right? That's the comparative advantage situation. But then if we look at cars, and then you see people in Italy driving BMW and people in, Germany driving whatever, Porsche or something.
I thought it was like in micro 101 that even though the countries produce the same good, and if they just produce two goods, cheese and meat or meat and rice or something, if one of them has like an relative advantage in producing the one good related to the other country's the same good, then they can trade and both be better off.
Oh yeah,
even though the country that is like not as efficient produces less than the other country. So
absolutely.
Like, let's say China and America, and you're talking about the fashion, clothing and stuff, then like I think America trades some high fashion stuff to China.
Maybe there's almost no clothing produced in the United States actually, but and the same is true in I think Denmark. But no, you're absolutely right, Kari. I think I might have said something in a confusing way, or maybe didn't say it right. But I totally agree that countries can be made better off, even if one country is worse at everything. Through trade, it can be made better off according to these simple Ricardian models, right? But
as long as the slope isn't the same for both countries.
Right, yeah. As long as there's a comparative advantage, you need to have a comparative advantage. But I guess the point I'm making is that in the like cheese and meat example, then either you're an exporter of cheese or you're an importer of cheese. You won't be both an exporter and an importer of cheese. Okay. But if we look at cars, we see that countries are both exporters and importers of cars. Right. So Krugman has a model, and now it's very simple. I mean, I could explain the idea to you in 30 seconds. That explains why that's true, and it seems very reasonable. And then that's based on this Dornbusch Fisher Samuelson. But so maybe I'll do something like that. I feel like this one's getting a little stale, but we'll see. Yeah, so I don't really have anything else. I mean, this is a very short Q&A unless either of the others have any questions about the talk so far.
I'm fine, thanks.
Cool. Okay. All right, so then for next week, we're just going to finish off these 3 puzzles. And then that's really kind of it for the course content. I think we still have a couple of weeks after that though. So we can do the review of the exam. You know, we can spend a lot of time doing that. And you know, just a review of anything else in the course as well is possible for those couple of weeks. So I'll talk to you next week then. So thanks a lot and enjoy the nice weather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you definitely have some bias towards the States.
Yes.
In your teaching.
I'll try to. I'll do my best.
Like in the first video, you were talking about the 2008 recession, and you were like, I think something happened in Europe as well.
Yeah. Well, I can't fix yeah, I guess I could fix my ignorance, but you're right. That very first lecture, the one with Pinker, you know, that book by Steven Pinker, he uses lots of examples from the United States. So it's probably also like my English language bias. You know, if I were reading Spanish, it might be better. But yeah, okay. I'll work on it, Kari. And I'll see you tomorrow, okay?
Yeah, I will see you. Bye-bye.